Hello there everybody, and welcome back to part 3 in my masterclass series on how to begin sewing and how to start your own cosplay making. This video will focus on how to choose fabrics, which in my opinion is one of the hardest parts of cosplay making because there's so many options out there. Really, there's a lot. And understanding what makes fabric, how fabric is made will really help you how to choose your own fabric. Now, if you're a beginner into garment making and you just started using patterns, the best thing about patterns, especially the big 4 patterns and store-bought patterns, they will have fabric suggestions actually within the pattern. So it's kind of a way around having to go down those aisles and having to feel what you think you're going to want to use. So let's take a look at the pattern. So this pattern specifically requests that you use canvas, denim, or linen types, or twill to make these Star Wars-esque jumpsuits. Then I guess that's what I use them. I actually used it for a Star Wars Battlefront 2 character named Iden Versio. I made her Imperial suit out of this pattern. Pretty good pattern. Now, the reason it suggests that is because this fabric doesn't have a stretch. It's going to look like a jumpsuit, and so you're going to want to use a non-stretch, woven, pretty thick fabric to make this out of, and that's why it suggests canvas, denim, linen, twill, that kind of thing. And those are heavier weight woven fabrics. Now, you're asking, what is woven? Now, fabric is made up of different types of fibers that are woven together in different ways to create the final fabric. Now, the main 2 types of fabric out there, the main 2 ways to make fabric is woven or knitted. I don't know, I'm making weird hand gestures, but this is kind of how I think of it. Woven fabric is basically woven together. There is a little bit of movement within the fibers themselves, but they don't stretch that much unless you cut it on the bias. But with a woven fabric, that's your typical linens, canvas, cotton, as a lot of different fabric that we actually wear day to day. But with more fashion trends of today, a lot of our fabric actually needs and has stretch to it, and that is using a knit type of weave. And that is, it's hard to do with my fingers, but it's like an interlocking way of weaving the fibers together to allow them to stretch. So it's like they're locked together, but they're allowed to move, versus something that is woven like this and they really can't move. Fabrics that use a knit type of woven method is spandex, lycra, knit, whether it's a 2-way or a 4-way stretch. There's a lot of different fabrics out there that are using a knit way of making the fabric. To test that, all you have to do is pull on the fabric and see if it stretches. If it stretches, it's woven like that. Now, those are the 2 things I want you to keep in mind when you are making garments. There are other different types of ways fabric is made, and that is a non-woven typical, and that is basically when the fibers are pressed, glued, or heated together. That is types of fabrics like wool or felt or things like that. Necessarily, well, wool is actually great, love wool, but you're not really wearing felt outfits out there. So just keep in mind that fabric is also created that way. Now let's bring it back to now you're starting to choose your fabrics for your cosplay. The biggest thing you need to know with cosplay is, do you want it to stretch or not? If you want it to stretch, look into the different types of knit type of fabrics out there. The majority of spacesuits are made, superhero suits are made from 4-way stretch spandex, and that is stuff like this. And this stuff is awesome. I love it. Big note, when you are using it, make sure you are stitching on a sewing machine with a ballpoint or stretch needle. It will save you a lot of time and crying. Stretch fabrics can actually be made of all kinds of different types of fibers. Cotton, polyesters, nylon, and there's actually blends of all of that as well. Keep in mind, synthetic versus non-synthetic acts differently under irons too. So synthetic fibers aren't natural. So synthetic fibers will sometimes melt if heat is applied too hard, versus cotton and natural fabrics, natural fibers will burn or roast underneath an iron and will leave a scorch mark. So make sure you understand what you're buying when you're buying those fabrics. Looking at the side of the bolt that has the directions of what the fabric is made of is something you want to note. Also, another tip, if you're working with things that are natural fibers, such as cotton and linen, sometimes you are going to need to pre-shrink your fabric before you cut your pieces, because one of the worst things is that when you do your first wash of your outfit, if it's made from those type of fabrics, it shrinks. That goes for a lot of other garments out there as well. Just read your pattern. Sometimes they do suggest that you pre-shrink your fabric before you cut it out. Highly recommend. You don't necessarily need to be pre-shrinking spandex, but if you are using other types of materials that are woven, I highly suggest a pre-shrink. One of the biggest things I suggest people to when they are looking for fabrics, especially something that needs to stretch, is the difference between a two-way and a four-way stretch. Both of the examples I have right here, actually no. This one is a two-way stretch. It may look like it's going to stretch four ways, but I promise you it doesn't as much. Now it stretches a little bit when I go to this, but when I go the other way and other direction on the fabric, it stretches a lot. What that means is that it has an optimal way of stretching and not stretching, that if you're making a full superhero suit out of something that is a two-way stretch, it's probably not going to work for you, and the minute you sit down, you're probably going to bust a seam, because it's not allowing your fabric to stretch all around your body and probably doesn't feel too good when you're wearing it. So make sure if you're making something that is close to your body, leggings, activewear, superhero suits, that you're using something called a four-way stretch. And it doesn't necessarily say that on the fabric bolt when you're buying it, but it's a really quick test by stretching it one way and stretching it the other way. This is a nice four-way stretch. And the best part about fabrics that are stretchy is that they bounce back. Making something out of something that is not knitted together in a certain type of weave probably won't bounce back if you stretch it too far, and you don't want that. One thing I do want to tell you guys about is to look out for opaqueness within fabric, because sometimes on a bolt, a fabric might look a whole lot more opaque, which is basically you can't see through it, than translucent, but the minute you unfold that and you lay it out, you can see right through the fabric. Sometimes cheaper fabrics by the yard are a little less opaque than you want, and they're way more see-through than you do not want. So just make sure that you look at the fabric flat and one-sided before you buy the fabric, to make sure that the opaqueness is to your liking. Some examples I have of woven materials is this linen right here. Really nice silk as well. And as you can see, there is no stretch to this. So these are woven fabrics that I use for a lot of suits, ball gowns, corsets, anything like that that does not need to stretch, that will allow me to use some pretty fabrics like this. And I also like to shop a little more natural fibers when I'm doing something like this too. Other woven fabrics that you'll probably encounter is denim, flannel, muslin, which is a very, very common cotton fabric that a lot of people use for patterning and draping on a dress form and trying to figure out how they want their outfit to look via the dress form, and also just scrap fabric to have around to put under your sewing machine to make sure it's running okay. Muslin is very cheap and you can buy it by the bolt. I highly recommend, if you're going to want to get into more pattern creating and draping on a dress form to create your garments, use muslin for your canvas. Also, one thing I want to stress to you all is to understand the weight of fabric. Lightweight fabrics act very differently than heavyweight fabrics. They don't necessarily say what type of weight they are when you are buying on the bolt. Sometimes when you're buying online, it does tell you if it's a lightweight or heavyweight, but this comes with just the feeling of fabric and just kind of understanding what you're working with. If you're using something lightweight like chiffon or organza, it's probably going to be more transparent. It's going to flow differently. It's also going to basically be very light against your body. Those are really nice fabrics, but understand that chiffon and canvas are very, very different. And depending on what you're looking for within your pattern, you will definitely want to understand what type of weight of fabric you want. Heavyweight fabrics are stuff as wool, or some wools. Some wools are really lightweight, but some other wools are heavier weight. Leather's a heavier weight fabric. Vinyl, canvas, sometimes denim is more of a mid-weight. Those are good for structured garments like pants and skirts, and I like to use heavyweight fabrics for accessories like making bags or sometimes like wrapping a prop handle. Those are really great options to use heavier weight fabrics. I will say that one of my favorite tips to give people, especially when they're shopping for fabrics for cloaks or ball gowns or maybe special corsets, is to sometimes get out of the apparel fabric aisles when you are shopping and go take a peek at the upholstery section. The upholstery fabrics aren't necessarily meant to wrap around your body. However, with a careful wash and maybe some fabric softener, you can soften up some pretty heavier weight fabrics to make it much lighter to use for cloaks or jackets or ball gowns even. My Anastasia cosplay is actually made from upholstery fabric that someone would have put on a couch. With a lot of time, patience, and just researching your fabrics, you will find yourself way more comfortable to go down the aisles of a craft or fabric store and feel the bolts and feel exactly what you want to use for your projects than reading on the bolt itself and finding out what you want. Because that is one thing about once you get into garment making, you will start loving fabric quickly and your stash will be getting bigger and bigger every day. So have patience and make sure you read those fiber contents, the weights of your fabric, and understanding stretch if you need it or not before you purchase the fabric. And definitely don't forget to read your pattern if you are buying a pattern at a store. It has fabric suggestions that I highly suggest you stick to when you are purchasing your fabric. All right, everybody, that is part 3 of this masterclass series on how to start making cosplays. I hope you enjoyed and you are a little less intimidated going fabric shopping in person now with my tips that I gave you. Just remember, does it need to stretch? Figure that out. Understand the weights of your fabric, and don't be intimidated by the miles and miles of aisles of fabric. Be sure to check out my other parts in this series on how to build your own sewing kit and beginning with a sewing machine, and how to figure out, with part 2, how to understand these patterns. Please join me in the final video of this series on how to modify existing garments to work for your new cosplay. I'll see you all then. Goodbye!